they pulled out the attitude indicator and replaced it with a Garmin G5 primary flight display, which is a digital attitude indicator that also has a speed tape, an altitude tape, vertical speed indicator, track readout, and a few more special functions that I will talk about at the end of the presentation. Okay, and we'll look at the Garmin G5 primary flight display. So this is now in place of where the attitude indicator used to be. So it sits between the airspeed indicator and the altimeter. And it is an incredibly rich display with a bunch of information on a very small screen, as you can see here. So the screen is, well, as big as it can be in the slot of the existing panel. So you have the attitude indicator in the background, obviously. You have the speed tape in knots on the left and the altitude tape in feet on the right. And if you look closely here at the right edge of the instrument, you see this little magenta tape, this little magenta worm coming up and down from the altitude here. That is your VSI. That's the vertical speed indicator. When the thing is talking to the GPS, so after you've turned on the avionics master and the GNS 430 has booted up and has acquired its satellites, once that is done, it also displays the GPS ground track up here and the GPS ground speed down here. And when it's talking to the 430, it also displays the VOR and the glide slope deviation here with the green pointers, or if you put the 430 into GPS mode, you don't get green pointers, you get magenta pointers, and then you have the GPS cross track arrow down here. And if you're flying a GPS approach with vertical guidance, then you even get a magenta pointer here, and then you have your GPS glide path over here. So it talks to the 430. It's nicely integrated with that.
Does it display GPS mode? Like, would it show LPV?
On the HSI mode, yes. If you switch it over to HSI, it'll also display that. Yep.
Okay, cool.
It does. So the thing that is a tad annoying, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to do about this procedurally, is that the speed tape is in knots, and the airspeed indicator on our 182 is and remains in miles per hour. So now you have two gauges telling you two different values. And I guess my recommendation is, if you are new and starting out on the 182 and you have not flown it before, you probably want to go with the knots, because then you have the same units as you are used to from the Diamond. If you have been flying the 182 and you have those miles per hour speeds remembered, because you know 105 on downwind, 90 on crosswind, 80 miles per hour on final, then I recommend you probably stick with the old miles per hour airspeed indicator. I'm sure Brian will have an idea what we're going to do about it procedurally. But for now, I would say when you're coming from the Diamond and new to the 182, stick to the units that you're used to from the Diamond. As you can see, the speed tape has the bugs here. It has best glide speed bugged, it has best angle of climb speed, best rate of climb speed, it has the maneuvering speed for max gross weight bugged, it has a yellow arc and a red line, and it has the white arc here, so the white line for flap speed. So it has all the information that your normal airspeed indicator has, and it has those neat bugs for the speeds that you normally need to remember. So especially having the best glide speed right on here when you need it is very neat. So I guess in case of emergency, rather than trying to remember, oh my God, what's the speed in miles, what's the speed in knots, just fly to the bug here. Yeah, so speed tape in knots, all the bugs here in knots, very helpful. Down here, that is the virtual ball. It should deflect exactly the same as the real ball. So as part of your taxi check, of course, taxi around a corner, you want to see the ball deflect in one side and the turn indicator deflect in the other side. And of course, the digital version should do exactly the same thing as the old gauge. Oh, by the way, the turn indication here is a magenta pointer that comes out here. I hope you can see my mouse pointer. So below the ball, you have this bar here that sits below the ball. And if you're going around a turn, a magenta arrow will come out here and point to the left for left turn, point to the right for right turn. You can see here it has a digital readout for the altimeter setting. So obviously you dial in the altimeter setting from the weather here. It has an altitude reminder bug, which in my opinion is the most useful feature of this whole installation, because finally you have a way to set your ATC assigned altitude and not forget about it, and it will flash at you when you approach it. That is super helpful for flying IFR. Because what I used to do when I flew IFR in the 182, I would set my assigned altitude on the VOR2 CDI. So if I was cleared to 3,000 feet, I would set the VOR CDI to 30 to 300 degrees, so that I would remember, so that I had some place in the panel to remember 3,000 feet. Thankfully, I don't have to do this anymore. Thankfully, we now have a proper altitude bug. In my opinion, the most useful thing of all the features of this little display. We also have a heading bug up here, but that is not really useful because this is not heading, this is GPS track. So don't try to fly when ATC tells you fly heading 290. Don't try to fly this with the tape up here, doesn't work, because this is GPS ground track. If you get ATC vectors fly heading 270, you still need to do that off the DG, of the gyro instrument. What this is useful is for flying approaches or for flying GPS flight plan, because when you have an active waypoint in the GPS and you have the 430 set to GPS mode, so that pointer is magenta instead of green, then you will also have a magenta tick mark up here on the track tape, and that magenta tick mark will be your ground track, your GPS, the GPS track that you need to fly in order to stay on course. So if you're flying a GPS approach, or if you're flying cross country on a GPS track, all you need to do is keep the magenta track right here in the center of the track bar, of the track tape. And then you're flying exactly the GPS ground track that you need. And in theory, if you fly a GPS approach and you always keep the GPS front course tick mark here exactly under the track readout in the center, then you will never fly off course. Then you will just track the approach course.
So we have a green line.
Right, the green one that you see on the display right now, that's for VOR mode. So if so you could display the currently tuned in VOR radial up here.
Oh, that's what that is. Okay.
Yeah, which is I don't know if that's that useful. Yeah, but that's what it does if you're in VLOC mode.
If you're in VLOC flying an ILS, will that also
yeah, same thing. Oh, right. Yeah, you're right. If you're in VLOC flying an ILS, that green tick up here will be the ILS front course, or the localizer front course rather. So in theory, this also helps you for flying an ILS approach, because if you keep that track exactly in the middle of the track tape, in theory, you should also be tracking the localizer. In practice, it doesn't really work because the localizer magnetic front course is not exactly correct with the actual magnetic course from the GPS. It's something that I found out the hard way. So this tick mark is somewhat useful on an ILS approach, but really useful on a GPS approach. That's
and so it's always displaying your magnetic GPS ground track.
Magnetic GPS ground track, exactly.
And it's always correcting
magnetic north.
variance, right? It's if you're flying east to west, it's automatically calibrating.
Right. So
Okay.
so it's magnetic. It's magnetic ground track. The thing is, it is the ground track. It does not tell you where the wind is coming from. It has no
Yeah.
idea where your nose is pointing, because your
Right.
nose will be pointed into the wind, obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so same thing. I'm going to play this short introduction video, but I think I already touched on pretty much all the functions you're going to need, and I will interrupt it as necessary. Okay, before we get to the video, so the Garmin G5 is a certified replacement for the attitude indicator, for the airspeed, for the altitude readout, for the vertical speed, for the turn coordinator and ball. So in theory, and I have seen this in light sport aircraft, you just need 2 of those, and that's your entire panel. You don't need any other airspeed, altitude, vertical speed, ball, turn coordinator, whatever. I've seen light sport aircraft that do that. That simply have 2 G5s on top of each other, and that's it. That's the panel. And in practice, though, it's, I think, a very good idea to have an analog backup airspeed and an analog backup altitude. And that's how I view it in our 182 right now. I would view the old altimeter now as our backup altimeter, and with the primary altimeter being in the G5, being in the PFD. For someone coming from the Diamond, I even would say that the airspeed tape is your primary airspeed indicator, and the old analog airspeed indicator is like your backup airspeed. For me right now, it's not quite that, because I have the miles per hour values for the 182 so ingrained. I fly it by the miles, that I'm more confused by the speed tape. All right, it also displays, we already talked about it, view on GPS, CDI deflection, glide slope, glide path, ground speed, GPS track. Yeah, we talked about all that. So let's go into the video and see it in action.
Hi, I'm Brian with the Experimental Aviation team, and I'm here to tell you about the G5 standby instrument. The G5 can be used as a completely standalone product or integrated into one of our G3X touch systems. First thing I'm going to do is tell you about the standalone features. It has its own sensors for display of airspeed, altitude, and attitude. It has a configurable airspeed tape, so you can change those color bands to anything you want, and you can set up V-speed bugs. It has an altitude pre-selector, and it is a baro-corrected altitude, so I've got my baro setting right down here in the right-hand corner. The unit does have its own built-in GPS with an optional external antenna, so I'm getting GPS ground speed here. The G5 does have an optional battery pack that will give you at least 2 hours of backup time if you lose primary power for any reason. The unit can be...
I just realized this video is talking about the experimental aircraft unit. So we obviously have the certified aircraft unit. It's a little bit different in that ours is actually talking to the panel GPS instead of having its own. And our backup battery, I believe, is even certified to run for 4 hours instead of 2. And our speed tape is not configurable. The speed tape comes with a factory configuration for a 182. It's factory programmed for a 182p model. So you cannot actually go in and modify like the best glide speed or modify where the yellow arc begins. Ours is for a unit for certificated aircraft that comes with a certified configuration for 182p. So you cannot go in and change where the yellow speed tape begins. Yeah, and I believe our battery is even good for 4 hours instead of 2.
Conveniently switched on and off from the power button in front. To adjust the baro setting, this is a dedicated knob, so all you got to do is turn it. To adjust the altitude pre-selector, press in on the knob, go to the altitude field, press in again, and now I can move the altitude selector up or down.
Again, the most useful feature of all. And within a couple of flights, within a couple of flights flying IFR in the plane, this press to right, press again, and dial in the altitude. Whenever ATC talks to you, it'll become muscle memory. It looks a bit confusing right now because you need to push, you need to turn to the right twice, then you need to push again, and then you dial in the altitude. I guarantee you after like 3-4 flights on IFR, that'll become second nature, because remembering your assigned altitude is just being able to have the bug now on the altitude tape is so helpful. And if you then take your hand away and you don't move the knob anymore after like 10 seconds or so, this select altitude field where you set 3,000 or 4,000 or whatever, this field goes away, and the altimeter setting here gets the blue box again. So if you just do nothing, it reverts back to a barrow setting. So the next time you hear from ATC, you check in with the new controller and they tell you Raleigh altimeter is 3004. Then you just go twist the knob, twist it to 3004, because it always reverts back to this knob being the default for the altimeter setting.
The other thing you'll notice in this menu is I've got a pitch offset. So just like a mechanical attitude instrument, I can come in and adjust my pitch offset up or down.
And that is actually very important, and the pitch offset was not correct when we picked up the plane from the maintenance, and I dialed it in later, because what you notice when the plane sits on the ground, it's actually pointing nose up, right? With the plane on the ground with a properly inflated nose wheel and a properly extended nose wheel strut, as long as the strut isn't flat, sits with a about 4 degrees nose up attitude on the ground. And when we got the plane back from maintenance, it was programmed to read 0 on the ground, which is of course wrong. And then when you flew in cruise altitude, it had your nose pointing like 5 degrees down. So it looked like you were always flying with a nose pointed down. So I have actually changed that. So now it should read like 4 degrees up on the ground, as it should. But then again, it works like it did on the old analog attitude indicator, where you had the knob and then the little plane in the attitude indicator would just jump up and down, responding to you twisting the knob. And that's just a digital version of that. It does exactly the same thing.
The addition of the CAN bus integration to the G3X system will bring over magnetic heading, and it'll make all of the bugs in the system synchronize. So you'll...
Okay, that's obviously something we don't have because we don't have a G3X Touch. So I need to scrub the video to where he talks about the battery power, because that is the only other thing that applies to our plane. Or maybe it's not even in this video. No, he just talks about linking it up with a G3X. So no, sadly, our plane does not have a G3X touch display, so the rest of the video is not relevant to us. Come on. Go away. There we go. All right, you saw, other than the rotating knob on the right side, it also had a power button on the left. So the knob that just has the power button symbol on it. The good news is you can completely ignore this button 99% of the time you're flying, because it'll simply come on when you turn on the master switch. It'll boot up. It'll be there in like 4 or 5 seconds. So you don't need to turn it on or off. And when you power the master switch down at the end of your flight, it'll say, okay, looks like you're powering down, and I'm going to power down in like 30 seconds. So you can completely ignore the power button, never press it. It'll power up when you power up the plane, and after you power the plane down, 30 seconds after that, it'll turn itself off. Except if you want it to stay on after the power goes away. So in case of complete electrical failure, so master switch off essentially, you can press the power button to keep the G5 running on its internal battery, and the internal battery is actually quite large, so it's definitely more than 2 hours. I think on our certificated units even 4 hours that it can run on the internal backup battery. Even if you have an alternator failure, you're burned through your battery, everything is dead, the G5 will keep running on its internal battery. And when it does that, when it is running on internal battery, On the left top of the screen, yeah, you can't see it here. So when it's actually running on battery, on the left top here of the speed tape, where in this picture the 130 is on the speed tape, it'll display a green battery symbol that looks like the battery symbol on your iPhone or on your smartphone. And it'll show you the remaining battery capacity of the backup battery, of the internal backup battery. So whenever you see a battery symbol up here that tells you, oops, it's running on battery. Why is that? When it's running off the aircraft system, when it's running off the aircraft main bus, the battery symbol will not be here. So if there's no symbol up here that tells you everything's working normally, and only if you actively say, I want you to run off your own battery after the master switch is turned off or after you've had an electrical failure, the symbol will appear up here, and it'll just have a percentage indication of how many percent battery it has left. So whenever the battery symbol shows up there, it tells you something. It's trying to tell you something. And another extremely neat things that students transitioning to the 182 and learning about slow flight will love. The bank scale has green tick marks that are speed dependent. They go further apart when you fly faster, and they grow closer together when you fly slower. And that shows you the bank angle for a standard rate turn. This is a super neat feature. Unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot of it. Unfortunately, I didn't find a picture where you see that. So essentially what happens, you have a green arrow. You have two green arrows up here on the bank scale, on the bank pointer. So there's a green pointer here and a green pointer over here on the other side. And the green pointers are at the bank angle, depending on your speed that you need to fly a standard rate turn. So if you simply go roll the bank to the green pointer, you will fly a perfect standard rate turn. Super neat feature. Finally, we already talked about that. Ground track display, useful for the GPS final approach course, super helpful. And finally, my pet peeve, learn how to use the damn altitude bug because it keeps you from blowing through ATC assigned altitudes. Super helpful. Yep, and that's all I have. That's all I have for tonight. Concludes the prepared material that I have. If you have any questions, now is your chance to ask. All right, everyone is shy. That's because I said it's being recorded for the internet. That's why no one is asking questions. Okay, in that case, I'm going to stop the recording now. So we have something for the Odyssey members who did not join us tonight.